From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 185, recorded on July 2nd, 2020. Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dickson de Palmier.
Hello, Vincent.
And from New York State, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Vincent. Hey, Daniel.
How's everybody?
Hey, everybody.
Is everybody well?
Yeah.
I am well.
Well, Daniel just gave us his COVID report over on TWiP. So if you want to hear that, go check it out at microbetv.tv/TWiP. But this is TWiP. And we have a clinical case, Daniel. Do you remember this?
I do, actually. I do. But, I always like to look at your little synopsis here. So, because you do such a fine job. But so for those of you tuning in for the first time, or those of you tuning back in, I presented the case of a 69-year-old woman who was coming to see me with an issue with several months of abdominal symptoms. The story was that she and her husband had gone to South Africa on what was going to be one of these wonderful high-end safari vacations. But when they arrived in South Africa, there were water issues. There was a water shortage. And so we discussed her husband on a previous case. He had actually developed Cyclospora Diarrhea, a parasitic gastrointestinal malady. And she had actually been there with the issue with unable to wash her hands. They were using hand sanitizer instead of much in the way of washing. And she actually had some symptoms early on, but then her symptoms improved. And then she had a stool test. And the stool test was positive for blastocystis hominis and endolimax nana. And then, as I described, she was given many different treatments. And she then came to me, and she had issues with abdominal discomfort, with mucus in the stools. Prior to this, she had been all great and was actually saying, I really regret that we went. This has just really ruined my life. And a lot of her concerns were, when will I be free of whatever is going on? So that I can spend time with my grandchildren. And I have a few notes because I know our emailers will mention this, but for those tuning in, just to make sure, by the time I see her, she had been treated with metronidazole, tinidazole, paromomycin, nitazoxanide, and Bactrim. And when I see her, she's saying, you know what, I'm still having some abdominal discomfort, and I'm just not myself since the trip.
All right. We had some case guesses here despite the pandemic. Well, I guess because of. Dickson, could you take that first one?
I'd be happy to. Elise writes, Dear TWiP trifecta, it's 82 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 degrees centigrade, in a turbulent lower Manhattan. It has been an upsetting, overwhelming week, but one in which I really thought so much about how everything from issues of racial inequality to the global pandemic are connected and respond to each other. Episodes 623 and 624 of TWiP have also made me think about the interconnectedness of these issues and those of sex, gender, and politics. Thank you for giving me something of my restless mind to work on so that it also broadens my sympathies and engagement. I do have a diagnostic guest for the 69-year-old world traveler. While her husband hosted a cyclospora infection and her symptoms were similar, that was not her parasite. Because she did test positive for B. hominis and Inanna, and because she failed to respond to a wide range of treatments that should have knocked out most of those other usual parasitic suspects, metronidazole, tinidazole, Bactrim, etc., I think she may have been living with a strongyloides infection. First, I was interested to learn that the presence of B. hominis can often indicate the presence of another parasite, and this would explain why the patient continued to suffer symptoms even after having her B. hominis dealt with. The patient's symptoms, gastroenteritis, Gastrointestinal discomfort, mucosy stools, and a general malaise are the symptoms of many parasitic infections. But when they persisted after so many treatments, I looked to see what sort of parasites might not respond to the medications that have already been prescribed. Strongyloides can be found in South Africa, and it is most easily contracted through water or infected soil. Due to the water shortage, it's very possible that the patient could have gotten contaminated on her safari. Strongyloides may not have been a diagnostic first thought because infections can be asymptomatic for a long time and can also emerge as skin lesions or respiratory problems, in addition to the gastrointestinal issues. Also, a single stool sample is not always sufficient to achieve a diagnosis. The preferred treatment for strongyloides is ivermectin, which was not among the bundle of drugs that the patient tried. My hope is that a course or two of ivermectin helped the patient improve and get back to feeling more like herself. As always, thank you very much for your podcasts, for your work, and for sharing it so generously. Many best wishes, Elise.
All right, Daniel.
So, Owen, or Owain? Is this your attempts at pronunciation, Vincent? I'm not sure.
This is his. He put that in.
Oh, so this individual gives us many choices of how to address them. Dear TWiP, I am a doctor from the UK, and I've been listening to TWiP for the last 4 years and have finally caught up. This year, I've been studying for a master's degree in medical parasitology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which the COVID-19 pandemic sadly interrupted. Although it has given me an excuse to start listening to TWiV too, which has been fantastic. That's actually where Chuck Knirsch went.
Yes, indeed.
And where I think Dickson went to have a beer once.
He did.
As far as my
or twice.
As far as my case guess goes, I found this one rather tricky. The lady's husband had Cyclospora, and she may have initially had this or other GI infections from a similar source. However, while they might suggest contact with contaminated water food sources, I was taught that E. nana is generally considered non-pathogenic, and so is Blastocystis hominis, although some people consider the latter able to cause symptoms. Regardless of the cause, most GI infections tend to be self-limiting, and it sounds like a significant amount of time has passed since the initial infection. The repeat O&P that this lady had was then negative, but her symptoms persisted. It sounds like she had many empirical treatments for presumptive pathogens, and regardless of what the initial cause was, it doesn't especially surprise me that she has ongoing abdominal discomfort and loose stools, given what must have happened to her gut flora. My inclination would be to undertake some watchful waitings, given we have no organism to treat, and see how her symptoms go. If they persist after discontinuing the antibiotics, we could reconsider sending stool specimens for PCR, O&P, to see if anything to help guide treatment is found. In terms of non-infectious causes, she may have a post-infectious IBS-type syndrome, which hopefully will settle with time. It might be prudent to consider further investigations for malignancy, for instance, with endoscopy, based upon her other risk factors, for example, age. If no other cause is found, but the clear trigger of her travel history makes this less likely, in my opinion. Or I've completely missed something obvious, in which case I'm very embarrassed. I would also like to query something Dickson said in the last episode. If you don't mind, sorry. Dickson stated last time that Microsporidia are protozoan parasites, but we were taught on my course that while previously considered protozoa, they're now considered fungi. I Googled this and found some links which seem to corroborate that. See below. Having never written in before, I want to thank you very much for producing all the great podcasts you do. They definitely teach me a lot and have been particularly useful for exams during the pandemic. Stay safe and look forward to being able to guess from now on. Yours sincerely, Owen. All right, Dickson, you got any comments here?
Not yet.
Yeah, it is. It's true.
It's possible that I'll be out of date.
It's a parasitic fungus. Yeah, Microsporidia.
There you go. But listen, I'm willing to admit I'm wrong. You know that. I'm wrong a lot.
All right.
I have no qualms about that.
Sophia writes, hello, hope you're all well. For my guess, I'd say that co-infection with Blastocystis hominis and Endolimex nana have been reported to result in chronic diarrhea. So I would say these could be the cause of her discomfort. In the beginning, I had thought of Giardia being involved as well, but after all the drugs taken, this would have been wiped out had it been there. What do? Tell the patient to give it some time. After all these drugs, it's normal that it will take time before GI fauna is restored. As for Dickson comment on doctors playing with different drugs, yes, this is how they diagnose diarrhea here in Greece. You never know the causative organism. Lab tests too expensive, drug less expensive. But as long as you feel better, who cares? Worse even, patients in Greece won't even go to the doctor. Instead, they go to the pharmacist, list their symptoms, and try the first drug suggested. Pharmacist advice is free of charge. Why pay the doctor? I don't like this, but it happens a lot. Enjoy your summer, Sophia.
Right. Jim writes, greetings, digestive detectives of the troubled intestinal tract. Several TWiPs ago, Daniel Griffin told us about two people in Africa who ate the same stuff and became woefully infected with Cyclospora parasite. Dr. Griffin effectively treated them with the very same medication that he prescribed in the current case. Still, one of them continued to suffer from frequent super loose propulsive stools, even after the offending pathogen was defeated. In that case, it turned out to be lactose intolerance was the culprit, because it sometimes is a lingering effect of cyclospora infections. If this has happened before on one TWiP, then it could happen again. It would also explain how the current couple might get different results after they ate all the same stuff. Of course, that means the wife in the current case must be ingesting dairy products post-parasite. If this is the issue, it will go away within a week. Better still, she can temporarily avoid dairy for faster relief. Keep on rocking in the rolling 20s. Take care, Jim.
Everybody's got a different idea here so far.
They do.
Daniel.
Andrew writes, Kia ora from Pongaroa. No book one, but I think Vincent has enough on his plate at the moment without having to traipse to the post office just to send me a book. Weather rating and 11 degrees C. COVID-19. New Zealand has achieved local elimination, and although we currently have 14 active cases, they're all people who tested positive in quarantine, having arrived from overseas. Life is back to normal, although everyone is encouraged to observe the now habituated social distancing, call that physical distancing, hygiene, and to keep a diary of where one has been. We celebrated by attending rugby masses in Mass. For those who are not familiar with rugby, it is like American football without the PPE. I like that. The walls keeping the virus from our population are holding, despite a few quickly repaired cracks that left some infected people into the general population without having been tested. Hopefully, our experience will help inform policymakers in the rest of the world. The case of the woman who went on safari. Given that she is testing negative on a range of tests and that her gastrointestinal tract has been carpet bombed with a range of antibiotics, I'm going to guess that she probably had C. cayetanensis like her husband and had cleared it or nearly cleared it by the time she was told she needed to be retested. Now she might have a helminth or another parasite that escaped in the ministrations of the doctor. But I think the problem is that her intestinal biome has been disrupted in the process, and this has led to her current symptoms, which indicate dysbiosis. As this is a what do we do and not a what is causing it problem, I would recommend that with a normal, healthy diet, it will resolve itself. Failing that, a course of probiotics, and in either case, she is screened again. If her condition does not improve or worsen, then a course of rifaximin might be considered. I think it's rifaximin.
All right.
Might be considered.
James writes, Woman visited South Africa and has trots, runs, two-step, 12 per day is described as watery and mucus at various times. OMP for blastocystis and endolimax, true public health menaces. You will find a subgroup of naturopaths, etc., that think these are real parasites. I did a Christian radio call-in show and found that people out there in Colorado, where the only parasite is Giardia, are convinced they are infested. I lived in fear of the first caller being parasites, toxins, or even worse, bipolar. The rest of the 2 hours was doomed. I found these traits in my own Christian community and also in Salt Lake when I was a resident. Anyway, when I think of parasitic chronic diarrhea of months, I think of Cyclospora like last time, Cystoisospora, or Cryptosporidium mostly. The mucus is concerning for a more dysentery amoebiasis presentation. I'd have to consider Giardia, of course. How about worms? I guess Strongyloides, Trichuris, Schisto seem unlikely. How about just unmasked lactose intolerance from any of the above that succumb to the patient's like total polypharmacology? Cryptosporidium seems something that could do all this. I don't know the sensitivity and specificity of the GI panel. It commonly gets missed as a yeast or similar on O&P, and you did not say whether they did an acid fast this time. And I think it could have survived the anti-parasitic carpet bombing the poor dear endured. I wonder if she has any normal flora left at all.
Interesting. Two disparate zones in the geography, the same metaphor, carpet bombing. That's interesting.
Oh, you picked that up, Dickson. Very good.
Is that a medical term that's commonly used, Daniel, do you think?
It is not. It is not.
I didn't think so.
It is a practice that is often used.
Exactly. I thought McNamara learned his lesson from that one. That doesn't matter.
Daniel, Dickson.
Yes.
You have...
I got the winner.
Got the winner.
Kevin writes, the wife of a guy with Cyclospora Diarrhea. Relevant to our TWiP discussions during episodes 180 and 183, there have been 118 cases of Cyclospora in the Midwestern United States, originating in pre-bagged salad mix, beginning on 05/11/2020. We now know, thanks to the three. Yep. Our patient has participated, perhaps unwittingly, in an orgy of pharmacology, subjected to courses of at least 5 different medications, defined as polypharmacy in some classifications. A scorched earth strategy? She remains months after her South African idol, non-specifically abdominal discomfort, mucus in her stool, and not feeling like her normal self. Traditional/conventional stool studies and PCR/nucleic acid test panels have subsequently been negative. I recall a quotation from 1968. We had to destroy the town in order to save it. Peter Arnett quoting an officer's description of Vietnam Battle of Ben Tre. Our patient's initial stool test on return from South Africa reported Endolimax nana and Blastocystis hominis. Consensus opinion regarding E. nana as non-pathogenic. PD7 describes Endolimax nana as a commensal whose reporting often elicits confusion. Blastocystis has a more complicated story, and our patient has been treated for blastocystis and has retested negative. That's interesting. Though usually described as non-pathogenic, blastocystis will be discussed in the end notes. Subsequent multi-organism testing from our chronically symptomatic patient has all been negative. This prompts a discussion of persistent diarrhea, defined as diarrhea lasting for more than 14 days in a returned traveler. The CDC has a concise diagnosis scheme for approaching the situation. There are 3-point scheme. 1, ongoing infection or co-infection with a second organism. C. difficile should always be considered. In our case, I would consider Strongyloides infection, though it is usually asymptomatic in the immunocompetent host. PCR should be ordered. Strongyloides is not included in the BioFire or Luminex multiplex GI panels. Eosinophilia is not always present, all discussed in the endnotes. 2, previously undiagnosed GI disease unmasked by an enteric infection. Think celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, and colon cancer. Standard celiac disease labs should be done. 3, a post-infectious phenomenon similar to TWiP 180, a transient lactase or disaccharidase deficiency. Other considerations are intestinal villus atrophy and post-infectious irritable bowel disease. After ruling out the possibilities described above, we enter the nebulous territory of functional disorders. The medical term functional, in quotes, has been used since at least the mid-1800s. In functional disorders, no structural, anatomical, biochemical, metabolic abnormality is detectable in spite of a demonstrable impairment in bodily function. The entire area is fraught with controversy, but conditions that are sometimes included in this area are fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, and relevant to our patient, irritable bowel syndrome. The difficulty with the category of functional disorders is that they may be perceived as being psychosomatic or perhaps neurotic malingering, leading to premature diagnosis, disclosure, diagnostic overshadowing, and a serious lapse of medical management. Our patient's symptoms are likely due to post-infectious irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. Note that blastocystis has been linked to IBS for decades. Besides, reassurance that she is not harboring a dangerous parasite and is in no way an infectious threat to her grandchildren, I would proceed with a trial high-fiber diet or twice-daily psyllium, dietary modification of a trial of avoidance of gas-producing foods such as legumes, cabbage, artificial sweeteners, etc. A gluten-free diet may be attempted. A trial of a dairy elimination is also recommended. In addition to the foregoing, reassurance and longitudinal follow-up with consistent primary care availability should go a long way to ameliorating this patient's distress. Thanks for keeping your grip on TWiP. P.S. Dr. G, fantastic broadcast presence on Nova. Dry clean tuxedo for Emmys.
Does that mean your tuxedo was a little dirty, Daniel?
I don't know. I hope not. I really pride myself on hygiene and clean clothes, but
you do. I would consider you a bit of a Beau Brummel, if you don't mind my saying so. In the best sense of the word, I once had the privilege of buying a straw hat with him, and to see him go in there and actually act as though his father owned the place and he could sit anywhere he wanted. It was fantastic. I ended up buying a Stetson fishing hat, by the way, which has a little repair necessary now, but highly impressed with the overall swagger with which you led your way into that establishment. I
want to just read one thing from the endnotes, Terminal Curiosities. Latrinalia. I've recently reviewed some literature on Latrinalia, the category of graffiti found in public toilets. Relevant to our pursuits are some verses regarding crab lice. Special mention to Dr. Despommier, who may still be partial to the toilet seat theory of crab transmission, TWiP 153. Though dubious, the toilet seat defense may have saved many a relationship. Poetry below. No need to stand on the toilet seat, for the crabs in this place jump 40 feet.
Right.
That's great.
This is from a 1965 study of American Latrinalia. And then
Dr. Harold Brown had a great answer. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, it's okay.
Dr. Brown had a great answer for a patient who came in with crab lice and said to Dr. Brown, he said, what are these? And he said, well, they're just what you think you are, young man. He says, well, really? He says, well, how do you think I caught them? He says, just like you think you did, young man. The guy turned right around and walked out. He knew exactly what he was going to have to do.
He also has an excerpt from New Guinea tapeworms and Jewish grandmothers, which Dickson has mentioned before. There's a very interesting story. You have to go to the show notes to read it, but it's about the toilet habits of the Somalis. Some Western people were worried, so they brought them stone toilets, and a year later they were all clogged. And they said, what happened? And they said, well, the Somalis distract themselves while defecating by clicking two stones together, and when they're done, they drop the stones into the toilet. So they all filled up with stones.
How funny.
You read that book, right, Dickson?
That's very funny. Yeah, many times I even knew the author pretty well. He was a good man.
All right, Daniel, we have our last one.
Cecilia writes, Dear doctors, I'm very happy to hear the news about the lower case of COVID in your area. Unfortunately, in Florida, we are not so lucky. Nope. My first guess about the patient in case study 184 has to do with her gut flora. It's possible that since she had diarrhea with no apparent cause, that her intestinal flora is not normal for her, since she has received several different treatments that may have affected her normal flora. My second guess has to do with her co-infection with B. hominis and E. nana. Although their pathogenicity is disputed, they have been associated with gastrointestinal symptoms in immunocompetent and immunocompromised patients. According to case reports in gastroenterology, if a patient is previously infected with a parasite causing inflammations to the intestines, other parasitic organisms can infiltrate the gastrointestinal tract, causing infection with more than one organism. This article also describes an immunocompetent patient with diarrhea lasting 6 weeks with co-infection of B. hominis and E. nana. Since the patient may also have been infected with C. cayetanensis before, followed by her co-infection with B. hominis and E. nana, her intestines may still be healing. I remember you mentioning lactose intolerance in patients with previous infections of C. cayetanensis. Since she has no documentation in her medical record to prove that, it's just a guess. Also, her latest labs were all negative, so that is why I have more than one guess. I'm very curious what your diagnosis was. Sincerely, Cecilia, St. Petersburg.
All right, there you go. So what do we have here, gentlemen?
Good question.
Do you
So
know?
we have a lot of different takes. We had a lot of like, just leave her alone, stop destroying her flora.
Right.
we had a strongyloides thrown in there.
That's right, we did.
We did.
Yeah.
We also had some guesses to the offending organisms that you found were actually the cause of the disease.
That's right.
Yep, we had that suggested.
Yep.
All right.
And so the lactose intolerance. So I have to say, I like that one where she actually had the same as her husband, but it wasn't picked up. And then you gave her all these things that messed her up, and then she drank milk. That's what I think. What about you, Dickson?
Well, I want some more lab tests, and I want to make sure that those two organisms aren't there. As far as I know, most drugs, even the ones that were used, don't permanently eliminate them.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to see further stool tests to make sure that there's no B. hominis and Endolamics nana before I start speculating as to what else might be wrong. Because I think those two organisms together are capable of causing mild intestinal distress, which would lead you to believe that there's something wrong, but you're not quite right. You're right. I've heard that many, many years of working both in the laboratory as a diagnostic technician and then later on with Dr. Brown, listening to his reminiscences of all his patients. So it's possible that those organisms are still hanging around. And like Daniel is fond of saying, there's no such thing as a sterile immunity. You get treated, you've still got some small remnant of the infection hanging around, no matter how benign or serious the organisms are. So it's a shame, because if that's the case, then there's nothing more to be done except that she's going to have to live with her illness as she perceives it.
All right, so I'm gonna read a sentence from our textbook, and then I'm gonna tell people what I did. Dickson will be satisfied, I think. So the first is, I think there is this issue: is B. hominis, does it cause symptoms? And we talk about it in our book, and then we say several cases have been described that defy any interpretation other than illness caused by B. hominis,
That's right.
based upon an extensive negative laboratory finding regarding all other known pathogens of the GI tract.
Yeah.
And so, one is, I do think that in certain cases, B. hominis can cause issues. So the first thing I did, as I said, before anyone gives you anything else, let's go ahead and just do lab testing. And the stool oviparasites, the GI PCR, everything came back negative. Right. So I actually then at that point agreed with most of our emailers. I said, you know what? I think you've been carpet bombed. I think what you need to do is nothing. Less is more. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to have you start with a very simple diet and then just slowly advance your diet with no therapeutics. Number one, you can go spend time with your grandchildren. That will take your mind off this, and I'll, reassure you that you are not contagious with some horrible pathogen. And without treatment, with time, slowly advancing the diet, she improved. And I think there are a couple things that people emailed about, is that when you just throw all these different medicines at someone, you can greatly disrupt their microbiome. But also when you've had some of these infections, you can actually develop issues with dietary intolerances because you've messed with the GI tract. You've maybe lost the enzymes in the terminal villi. So this woman actually did well by doing less, by giving her no medicines, by just having her slowly advance her diet. So,
right. So it would have been, I'm sure you did this, but you probably cautioned her about the way in which these organisms are acquired by saying, with good, proper personal hygiene, even if you still had these organisms, your risk of giving them to your grandchildren are zero.
Yeah, fortunately, I didn't even have to go there. I could just say, you don't have them. It's just,
I mean, it's not like COVID-19. You don't breathe on somebody and get it. You have to be contaminated with something to give it to somebody else.
No, it is true. These are not highly transmissible. That's why these, when someone comes back from a trip, no one's spreading these all over. Now, Endolimex nana, interesting enough, right, is fairly ubiquitous.
Yeah.
So
that's right. It also indicates that they were exposed to fecal contamination.
Yeah, which I suspect happened on the South African water shortage trip.
So every now and then you get these awful, internal feelings about, well, maybe it's some virus we haven't heard of before. Maybe it's even a fungal infection that could be causing this, which was transmitted by the fecal contamination. So,
Yeah. Now, what I should do is, I usually do my little plug for support of FMRIC before I give the answer, right? When we've got like everyone listening in. So I gave you the answer, but I'll still throw my plug. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's been listening, and everyone who's been going to parasiteswithoutborders.com to donate. We were able to raise in June with the Parasites Without Borders match $12,304 for FMRIC's site in Baduda. Oh, it's fantastic. We sort of did calculations. This is going to be able to save hundreds of people's lives. This is tremendous. So we're going to extend this fundraiser until the end of July. So please visit parasiteswithoutborders.com, and for every $1 you donate, we will double that and give FMRIC these donations to help support. And this clinic in Uganda, it is run, staffed by the local Ugandans. So Musa and Emmett, I don't know if you're listening to this, but a hello from us at TWiP. And thank you people for continuing to help us support that really important clinic.
All right, now we give away a book.
Indeed.
We had 6 guesses, so let's pick a number between 1 and 6.
You want a drum roll?
Number is 3. Number 3. Who is number 3?
Jim, right?
Jim.
Number 3.
Jim. Jim is Jim from Rockin' in the Roiling 20s, winner. All right, Jim.
Excellent.
Send your address
to
TWiP at microbe.tv, and we'll get this out to you sometime. I have a little backlog, but I'll get to them, I promise.
Right.
All right, now we have a paper which Dickson picked. Is that correct?
So I picked both of these papers.
Well, one of them is a commentary.
It is? No, not the ones I picked.
Well, the 2 you sent me, one was a commentary.
Mm-hmm.
One is the malaria parasite as an intrinsic clock. It doesn't look like a commentary.
Oh,
it's a research article. Look here.
Let me see.
It's a research article. See that? But it doesn't involve using a human malaria strain. It uses
I see. The malaria
Plasmodium
parasite.
shaboti.
Okay.
And the other one is, ironically, they were both working on the same problem together. It involves Plasmodium falciparum, and it's a malignant tertian life cycle.
All right. So let's do that one. An intrinsic oscillator drives the blood stage cycle of Plasmodium falciparum.
Yes.
So what is this cycle? Tell us about
it. Let's start with the life cycle. Is exactly right, because as this parasite, Plasmodium falciparum, is acquired, the sporozoites are injected by the female Anopheline mosquito. Of course, they go to the liver, they develop into cryptozoites, and then they come out into the blood, and they start to reproduce into blood cells, inside blood cells. And the reproduction of this parasite, apparently, is locked into some circadian rhythm, which is coincident with metabolic patterns of the host. That's remarkable because it adjusts its intrinsic clock to coincide with certain periods of time associated with the same clock phenomena, but of course for different reasons, of the human host, so that it develops a synchrony. And it starts to reproduce synchronously and release from the red cells synchronously, infecting more red cells synchronously, etc. So these fevers that result from this synchronous behavior were first described by Hippocrates way back when. So he was the one that set down into stone how you count. And it's unfortunate because Plasmodium falciparum is a periodicity of 2 days, but it's called tertian, malignant tertian, because Hippocrates counted day 1 of infection, then day 2 of infection, and then the parasites break open and begin a new infection. But the next day isn't counted as day 1 again, it's counted as day 3. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why that was true, but people bought that and it entered into the medical text, and that's how we describe this periodicity. It's not always periodic to begin with because the parasites are in low numbers, but once the numbers start to build up, very often the reproductive cycle of the parasites inside the red cells are linked, and you get these periodic bursts, which corresponds to the chills and the fevers, the paroxysms of malaria. Daniel, you want to add anything to that?
I was going to direct people because I think this can be tough for people. Like, well, tertian, quartet, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
And I tried to, when we did our last edition on page 102, to go through this and sort of this concept of, the day of the fever. So you have a fever. So this is day 0. The next day is day 1. The next day is, so 1, 2, 3. So it sort of throws people when they consider like the different counting. So I think as you mentioned, if it's 48 days, if 48 hours, that's going to like hit you from the day when, the day that you're having the fever. So day 1, day 2, day 3. Day 3 is only 48 hours away from day 1. So it's not really like patient 0 times 0. It's, day 1, you have a fever. Day 2, day 3, 48 hours later is day 3, tertian. If it was 72 hours, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, quartan.
Exactly.
So it's a little bit like confusing as far as the terminology. I really think it is.
I used to throw up my hands and say it's Greek to me.
Actually, that's really good. But no, I think that's the, and I think this is also important. People learn this, like, malaria has these periodic fevers, but those periodic fevers are something you see when you're in the tropics, when you're in a zone where it's had enough time to create this. Your travelers will not necessarily have these tertian, quartan patterns. And I think that's really important because people often discount malaria because it doesn't hit that pattern.
Yeah, exactly. So these 2 papers, research groups attempted to tease out from the parasite and the host what part of the cycle that's periodic is intrinsic and what part is extrinsic. And I think they both ended up concluding that it's partly intrinsic and partly extrinsic, depending on what you're looking at. And I was amazed at how many genes are involved in intrinsic clock behavior, weren't you? I mean, there are over 3,000 genes that they identified.
Yeah, I mean, they seem, they come off pretty strongly with their sort of weighing on the side of our findings provide strong evidence for the existence of an intrinsic oscillator in Plasmodium.
Right.
And they suggest that the parasites have evolved mechanisms to drive this periodicity that, I think this is pretty cool, that may align with host circadian rhythms because the periodicity of this parasite directly affects when and how and the potential for transmission because the female anopheles, right, that 1% of female anopheles that are double biters, they bite at night in the dark. Right. So if you sleep with your lights on, they're not going to bite you if you sleep during the day. And, so they need to time things such that you have this ability to be bitten by a mosquito and that mosquito can take up the infective forms for the next cycle.
It's quite impressive.
Daniel, when you go to malaria zones, do you sleep with your light on?
So I sleep under a under a bed
sleep?
net. No, I sleep under a bed net. So I have one that I often travel with, but like when I'm at the clinic in Baduda, the beds all actually have the treated bed nets around them. But I also have a hammock that I've used in areas, and it actually has it has a built-in mosquito net. Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Very cool.
Can't they get you from below?
Well, so that's interesting. So they can't. Yeah, the fabric is
It's too
tight.
thick. Yeah,
it's too thick, so they can't bite through. And then there's what is called a ridge line. So there's a line that goes across. It actually holds the net part up and above my face, so that they can't bite through that either. So yeah,
neat. So in both cases, they cultured the parasites, right?
Yes.
So they say this makes it independent of the host, and then they measured the RNA. They actually sequenced all the RNAs.
Every 3 hours, they took samples.
Yeah, and do
I
RNA
didn't want to be that person.
And then they have these maps of the RNAs. You could see the waves of expression.
That's correct. That's great stuff.
It's very cool. But I mean, what I found interesting is that they're not precisely the same. They can vary.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, they had 4 strains of Plasmodium falciparum.
Yeah.
And they were all different.
They're all different. That's right. And so, yeah, the other one is not a human malaria.
No, Chabody is a rat parasite, as I recall.
And it's just a lab system that people study. Is that right?
Well, it's a lookalike for some aspects of Plasmodium falciparum. That's right.
So the real question is, what's doing this, right? What's controlling this? And they don't know. We have circadian clocks in mammalian cells, which are controlled by cyclins, right? And cyclin cell division proteins. But these parasites don't have them, and they say they must have something we don't recognize, right? That's doing this, that's controlling it, because they don't have cyclins.
So, Vincent, you're a virology expert. Do viruses sometimes pattern their reproductive cycles with internal clocks that regulate cell division and things of that sort?
Yes, many viruses cannot reproduce in cells that are not undergoing DNA synthesis and mitosis, dividing cells, right? And so a lot of DNA viruses kick cells into dividing, like with T antigens of SV40 and adenoviruses, they make the cells divide. Some retroviruses, as Daniel knows, HIV can infect post-mitotic cells. It doesn't care, but Maloney, which Goff worked on for many years, retrovirus of mice, requires the cells to divide. So it differs.
That's a cancer virus, right?
Which one?
Maloney.
Leukemia, right, Daniel? Yeah.
So
that was actually in some of the gene therapy. That was one of the reasons that I've worked with HIV-based lentiviral constructs, because you work with the murine constructs and you're restricted to cells that are replicating, where the HIV-based ones can actually, to some degree, get into non-replicating cells. So
polio virus.
Polio couldn't care less about the nucleus.
Right.
You could actually
it's an RNA virus, sure.
You could influenza does require the nucleus. It reproduces in the nucleus, but poliovirus, you can take the nucleus out of cells and the virus will replicate. It doesn't require anything from the nucleus, but
that's interesting.
It depends on the virus. These 2 papers are interesting to me because they're really fundamental questions, right?
That's right.
With no apparent therapeutic value.
Exactly.
Now.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, it's basic science.
It's basic science.
Who will ever need to use this? What are they doing?
You'll never know.
You never know. That's the thing. You never know. And in my last virology summer school lecture today, I did the lecture was on viral therapeutics, using viruses as vectors for all sorts of things. And I said all of this is possible because people just did basic science and it turned out to be useful. And this can be useful too. Who knows? You never know. Serendipity. Right. It's very important. I
was going to say I saw potential therapy here. Yeah. So they go back, and Traeger and Jensen, right? Dickson, you like to talk about Traeger. They noticed that you lost this synchronicity, that things desynchronized in culture. And then we're seeing that there may be some way that internal clock is affected by something the host is doing. If you could somehow make it so that the gametocytes, for instance, were only circulating during the day when the mosquitoes were not
Right.
biting you. If you could just figure out what it was,
That'd be
and a
good.
person could just mess with that synchronization, then you wouldn't have people transmitting malaria. So this potentially actually has,
Sure.
I think everything, right? Everything anyone discovers, now you can start thinking, and you may not have gone into it thinking this would be useful, but that's how you come up with
Oh,
stuff.
sure.
So.
Absolutely. I mean, they may be thinking of therapeutics down the line, but you got a ways to go and you have to figure out stuff. But I could see, that makes a lot of sense. Dickson, why were you fascinated by these papers?
Well, again, I think Daniel hit the nail on the head. I was at Rockefeller when Traeger was in his heyday, and I also became a fishing partner with Jim Jensen. So we had a lot of time to discuss the nuance of how the history of this thing unfolded. And so I knew both of those people, I thought, pretty well. And Jim Jensen is still alive, by the way. And it still remains a mystery as to what's going on. So that's 25, 30 years. That's even longer than that ago. It's hard to remember how long ago it was now, but I've actually never lost my enthusiasm for basic biology for the malaria parasite, considering how long we've known about this thing, and we still haven't cracked everything wide open yet.
Oh, no, we never will.
I don't think so. I agree with you.
Dickson, you have a hero?
I do. I've picked a gentleman, and I use that word strictly in this case. His name is Elmer Pfefferkorn, and he is the former chairman of microbiology at Dartmouth Medical College, Giselle Medical School as it's named now. We became friends back in the 1990s. At various meetings we met and sort of grew fond of each other's company, let's say, and enjoyed sitting down and discussing esoterica. I listened, he talked. Trust me, I didn't know anything then. And I may not still know anything, but I valued his he's like Kevin. When Kevin writes his all these wonderful references to the 1700s and 1800s, Elmer was totally aware of all that stuff and used to relate it to what's going on in the present and say, sometimes things just don't change. The language might be different, but the situations remain similar. And he died last year, unfortunately. Of course, we all have to die, but he was 87 years old. He lived a full life. He spent all of it at Dartmouth, except for the time when he went to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship to learn medicine. And he wasn't enrolled in medical school. He just wanted to learn medicine. And while he was there, he became fascinated with viruses. And Vincent, obviously you know this because Elmer Pfefferkorn has made many contributions to the viral literature. He studied phages and bacteriophages in particular, how genes are transferred from bacteria to bacteria, perhaps through viral sequences, etc. But eventually he got more interested in eukaryotic cells and spent most of his time thinking about Toxoplasma gondii and how we can get rid of it and why it's such a ubiquitous parasite and all of the nuance of this relationship. We were reunited in our friendship when we were both selected as the chair and co-chair of a Gordon conference. His was in 1989 when he became the chair of that Gordon conference on parasitism. And then following 3 years, I became the chairman of that same conference and was eternally grateful for Elmer's kind words and generous contribution of time and understanding to someone whose career was just starting to blossom, I guess. Maybe you'd put it that way. That is to say, namely my career. And he was very supportive and wrote several letters of recommendation for me, et cetera. So I was very grateful for his input. He was a good friend of all the people who did cutting-edge parasitic disease research. And he never said a nasty word about anybody. He never had an unkind word to say about anyone. And he never considered science as a competition. He was always willing to share his results with everybody. He was never afraid of being scooped. In fact, he was looking forward to it. He would say something to somebody and says, I bet you he uses that for something. I bet you he does. He was a scholar in the strictest sense of the word. He collected rare books. I believe he was the president of his local bicycle association. He used a bicycle to work every single day. He ended up marrying his lab assistant, I think, when I'm probably going to misquote this, so I don't think I should go any further on that one. I'm not familiar enough with his personal life to say whether or not his wife had died or not, but he ended up being married to a woman who was his laboratory assistant for the last 12 years of his life in the laboratory. He had a remarkable sense about fairness and invented a system for making sure that faculty had enough money to conduct research. And I think they probably outlawed this procedure long after he abandoned it. But what he would do is he would tithe people something like 10% of their NIH grants, and he would put it into a savings account. And if you were unfortunate enough not to get your grant renewed and you had a grant for 3 years, you were eligible for 1 more year of support from this sort of like a war chest that he kept hidden in a bank account someplace. And if you had your grant for 6 years and you lost it, you got 2 years of support, et cetera. It was based on longevity. And he never lost a faculty member because they lost their grant. They usually all ended up getting refunded, and he was very proud of his system. Unfortunately, a system like that can be abused by people that are not as ethical as people like Elmer. So that's no longer possible to do. But in the interim, when it was, he used it to spread the wealth among all of the faculty members and make them all feel as though they were wanted and necessary for the operation of his department. And I thought that he was one of the rare examples of a person who was not only a great teacher and won the award some 16 times, I think they said, over the length of time that he was there, but also he never missed a study section to approve his grants. He never once dropped a grant because they said, no, you can't have it. So that's a hero in the best sense of all those words.
Nice. Yes. He's quite a teacher, I understand.
Did you ever know him?
Never met him.
You would have loved him. He was a very lovable person in many respects.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Finally, that brings us to see, well, we will find out if Daniel actually has a new case study for us. He might not. He might be out.
You think?
Because he hasn't traveled in so long.
Vincent, has he ever not had a case?
I have a case. This will be a hint. I've been seeing about one of these a week for the last
really?
For the last several weeks. So I don't know if that's a hint for people. But I had to, which one am I going to present, right? So this is a 75-year-old woman who has a pretty unremarkable past medical history, hypertension, high cholesterol, and she is admitted to the hospital with fever, general body aches, a little bit of a cough, loose stools for about 2 weeks. And what really triggered the admission was her sodium level was 118. So I'll give you a little bit of context. Here's a woman who is sheltering in place in Huntington, Long Island, right? So the North Shore, a little bit out on Long Island. And every day she is doing a bit of gardening outside. But just she and her husband, they're not traveling beyond these environs. And when she goes through it, she felt poorly for about a week. And then after the week, she went to see her primary care doctor, had some blood testing done. That was actually what triggered or what detected the low sodium. She reports that even after that visit, a weekend, she continued to worsen. And by the day she comes into the hospital, she's continuing to have fever, just feeling poorly. They do the COVID testing, of course, and she is negative. And she doesn't report much other in the way of symptoms. When she's initially seen, she doesn't have a fever then, but then she goes on to have a fever later that day. And I'm going to give you a little bit of more sort of information. She takes cholesterol medicines. She takes some medicine for the cholesterol. We do some blood work, and this is actually a little bit disturbing, and then I'll go back to the physical because I see the lab work before I see her. Her white blood cell count is down at 2,000. So that's much lower than it should be, so decreased white blood cells. Her hematocrit is down at 24. That's about half of what we'd expect. Her platelets are down at 40, right? And so normally that would be about 250. And her sodium, when we tested, is in the 120s. Now, I examined this woman, and really pretty unremarkable exam. And she doesn't look that ill. Now, a bunch of blood work is done. She has a Lyme test, which is negative. She's tested for another list of tick-borne diseases, Ehrlichia and Anaplasma. These all come back negative. Okay. So what are we worried about? Because here we are. I'm going to say a parasitic disease this summer, Long Island. I'm seeing about one a week. And I want people to, what would potentially cause these fevers that won't go away? The rest of the testing is negative. She's got anemia, decreased white cells, decreased platelets.
And she's HIV negative, right?
She is HIV negative. She is sheltering in place with her husband. She has no bad habits.
How is her husband? Is he fine?
He's fine.
And that's it. The two of them just live alone, right? No kids coming in?
Exactly.
She's the only one that gardens?
She's the only one who gardens.
So she's in close contact with the earth.
The earth.
The earth.
Yes.
And
no guaiac test?
Nope, no guaiac test. But normal brown stools.
Interesting.
What do they eat? Anything unusual, or is she a vegan?
It's a normal diet. And this is all, and I will say this is all very acute because she had blood work done it was actually about 3 weeks before this blood work, and it was all normal. So normal hematocrit, normal white blood cells, normal platelets, everything was normal. So this is all very acute. So acute fever, anemia, decreased white cells, decreased platelets.
Are there mosquitoes in her garden?
Yeah, there are mosquitoes. Mosquitoes.
Because I know what's been going up around these parts, Dickson.
Do you now?
Yes. Okay, that's good. One a week. Wow.
Jeez.
Interesting. Okay. Can I read 2 emails, quick emails?
You may.
Interesting. One is from Luke, who said, I was lucky enough to return to South Africa over the southern summer for placement as a medical student. I grew up there, but now I live in Canberra, Australia. It's bloody cold here today. It was minus 3 Celsius when my son woke at 6:30.
Yeah.
Sounds like Dickson was at the Mala Mala Game Reserve next door to Kruger.
Wasn't.
No.
No, it was at Sabi Sands.
A school friend was a ranger there in the late 90s. I managed to get an Imfolozi Game Reserve. I managed to get to a Imfolozi Game Reserve on my trip and had an excellent time. I thankfully didn't contract Cyclospora like I presume your unfortunate 70-year-old did in 183. Thanks for the show. I love the conversational style, and it's always really interesting. Okay. Now, Christine. Hey, guys. I haven't written since I won my book last September, quit my job, and opened a pub. I still listen every month, and my staff think I am really weird, and maybe they're right. Ha ha. COVID was a nasty hit for us. We were 5 months into owning this business when we got shut down. Thankfully, unlike so many other places, we had the most amazing support from our customers, friends, family, and most important, our landlord, and we pulled through and opened the doors on May 15th when lockdown started to loosen up. We were really grateful. Our city got minimal cases, and aside from buying toilet paper and yeast, it wasn't really that crazy here. So I attach a picture for you. I was cutting up chicken for a batch of chicken fingers, and one of the breasts I pulled out didn't look like the others. It had a dead worm hanging out of it. I gave it a little tug and popped it out. I'm pretty sure it's a roundworm, but I'm not positive. I can say I've never actually seen this before. I like eating the food at my place, and that breast did get tossed. As cool as it was to pull out and play with, I would never eat it or serve it. I look forward to knowing whether I was right or wrong, and if I'm wrong, what type of parasite it was.
Right.
Hope you're all doing well. Can't wait for the next episode. P.S. Weather, 22C today. We were supposed to get thunderstorms, but all we got was some clouds, a couple claps of thunder, and then the sun came out, and it was a beautiful, not too hot day. Love, peace, and chicken grease. Christine.
Does Christine say where she's from?
No, she doesn't.
No, she doesn't.
Some state where she didn't have a lot of cases, apparently.
Well, possibly. Or some other place like New Zealand. Or
I should know, but I'm going to look it up because I have her...
chicken breasts.
What do you think
at the
that
pictures
is?
that she sent, and then she's got the piece of whatever that white stuff is on a fork. Chicken breast. This is muscle tissue, right?
Yeah.
So my mind is not focused on parasites at this point.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm disappointed.
Don't be.
So I have to say I'm not sure what it is, right? Because
that's exactly right. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know what it is.
But
pulling it out of a breast of chicken.
Is that a breast? I'm trying to think. Does she say it's a breast?
She said it was a breast.
She did.
But it's some kind of worm, right?
No,
Yes.
not necessarily.
You think it's like a piece of connective tissue?
We don't know until we look at it under a microscope.
Huh. So to you, it doesn't look like any worm you've seen.
But coming out of muscle tissue?
Is that the thing here? Yeah.
That's the problem because they do have anisacchids, right?
Yeah.
They do have
Sure, they
intestinal.
do. They've got a lot of different things.
Yeah, so if you were looking at intestinal, they've got a whole bunch of different. They've got cestodes, they've got their nematodes, but muscle with a white worm like this, I not anything that I know about.
Yeah, that's exactly me.
Seems
But
to
I'm
be
not
coming-
a chicken parasitologist.
Seems to be coming out of a little hole in the breast.
It looks that way, doesn't it?
It does, right?
Yeah.
But
Weird.
there's another thing, a squiggly right next to it. That's
Little one, yeah.
and you see these little white lines in there. That's fascia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those are the connective tissue bundles, and so
those white things look like bacterial colonies.
right. She didn't say it moved either. So I
Said it was dead.
That it was dead. She said it was a dead worm hanging out of it. Well, she made the assumption it was a worm, but I don't think it's proven until we see it up closer.
Okay. By the way, she is from Edmonton, Alberta.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
If I were her, I would have cut below it and above it and thrown out the middle piece.
And you would have eaten the rest?
Yeah.
Or just cook it well. Just cook it well. It's just a little
well.
bit of extra protein.
Well, if anyone wants to have a look, these will be in the show notes, microbe.tv/TWiP. Take a look at the photos. If you like what we do, consider supporting us, microbe.tv/contribute. And questions, comments, guesses for the current case, TWiP at microbe.tv. We'll be back in about a month, so you have some time to check it out.
Indeed.
Daniel Griffin.
And if anyone knows what that is, let us know.
Please let us know. That's right.
We had a case today, I should probably just share, where a gentleman had these maggots actually in his leg. Yeah, so I knew what those were.
Indeed.
Wow. All right, Daniel Griffin's at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thanks, Daniel.
Oh, my pleasure as always.
Dickson Depommiers at trichinella.org and thelivingriver.org. Thanks, Dickson.
You're welcome, Vincent. We'll get that microphone working.
I'm sure we will. I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.blog. I'd like to thank Ronald Jenkins for the music and ASM for their support. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another TWiP is
parasitic. Even with video, we can't get it.
That was horrible.
That was terrible.
None of you get the job.